right. Well, welcome to the Grolier Club, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jamie Cumby. I'm the L&A Michelson librarian here at the Grolier Club, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker. In addition to being a truly delightful person, Kristy Caldwell is an illustrator based here in New York. She's illustrated more than a dozen children's books, including Flowers for Sarajevo, a 2017 New York Public Library Best Book for Kids, and helped launch experimental literary journal Carrier Pigeon, Illustrated Fiction and Fine Art. She's taught at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, at Pratt Institute, and at the School of Visual Arts, and she's currently an assistant professor of illustration at Queens College, CUNY. Her work has been recognized by American Illustration and Communication Arts, but most importantly for me and for the members in the room, Kristy is also the first ever visual artist to be awarded our library's William H. Helfand Fellowship. That's over the course of 20 years. When I first read her application, I was instantly delighted by its premise. A series of bookplates where a bookshop cat wanders through the Grolier Club's collection. The project she's going to be presenting tonight, Catenary Books, is the result of her 2 weeks spent up in the reading room with me and my colleagues this past summer. She pored over the club's extensive collection of bookplates, studying their visual motifs and design characteristics, as well as the ways in which collectors have historically fashioned their identities through their bookplates. I won't talk more because I just want to see these bookplates. I've been dying to see them. I understand she finished them literally this week. So we're seeing hot off the presses the fabulous results of her research here at the club. Please join me in welcoming Kristy.
Thank you so much. So I also want to start by thanking just everybody at the Grolier Club who welcomed me and supported me. I had no idea I was the first visual artist to receive this fellowship when I applied for it. Just sort of dove in. But I especially want to thank Jamie Cumby, the Bruce and Mary Crawford curator, Scott Elwood, library assistant Kevin McKinney, and the executive director, Declan Keeley, who are also wonderful. So I don't know if I can explain this project as well as Jamie already has, actually. But Catenary Books is basically a series of 6 narratively connected bookplates. I developed them during my fellowship here at the Grolier Club Library. And so when I started, what I hoped to gain from the fellowship was a deeper understanding of bookplate traditions and how bookplates carry meaning. And I did get that. But I also gained, I think, a new community through the fellowship, met a lot of the members who were coming in and out, was introduced to, everybody who floats in and out of the building. And it's just a really wonderful community. I'm so glad that I had a chance to spend so much time here. So just this entire process has been a real joy since day one. And I'm genuinely excited to share this project, which I've been working on basically since June, and also how it's been influenced from what I learned from the Grolier Club's collections. So before applying to the fellowship, I visited this exhibition here at the club. Very happenstance, it was raining. I needed to get out of the rain. And it ended up being kind of a transformative visit because it directly led to my application for the fellowship. This exhibit, Imaginary Books, Lost, Unfinished, and Fictive Works Found Only in Other Books, presented physical representations of books, games, and ephemera that only exist inside other texts, which is amazing for me because I'm very interested in world building and making physical, objects to represent that. So I pulled a couple of examples from my own photos and typed out some excerpts from the labels so you can kind of understand the playfulness of the exhibit. So the photo on the left is, I don't want to speak for the artist, but it's a physical representation of a book that exists within Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. So the excerpt says, "The Matter of the Dragons contained all that was known of the early days of dragonkind outside of their own records, which they do not share." So one thing I really loved about this exhibit was the kind of in-world text on the art labels that brought you fully into the world instead of speaking from the remove of a curator. And the example on the right is called The Wild Book. It also had an in-world art label, and an excerpt says, "The Wild Book is a book willing to be read by only one reader and resisting all attempts on the part of anyone else." So this gave, obviously, if you're interested in illustration, storytelling, narrative art, being exposed to an exhibit like this gives you a lot of ideas instantly. One thing I took from it was the idea of using paratext, the material outside of the main text that influences how you see it, like the cover, the footnotes, the table of contents, as a tool for world building. And when I got home, I browsed the digital collections of the Maria Gerard Messenger Women's Bookplate collection, which they helpfully have accessible online. And it collects more than 2,000 examples of women's bookplates. And so, the wheels just kind of started turning on the idea of using a bookplate as a narrative object and building a series from that. So the first thing I just want to quickly address for people who aren't as interested in book ephemera as I am is like, what is a bookplate? So they're labels attached to the inside of books. They're also called ex libris, which is Latin for from the books of. They function as ownership labels. So when you see ex libris on a bookplate, it's marking that book as part of a specific library. And the example on the left is an example from the Messenger collection. The example in the middle is something I saw on my first day. I think I was too excited and I didn't write down which specific collection it was from. And then the one on the right is an example of, pasting a bookplate into a copy of a book, just so you can see it where it lives. They're very small, designed to fit into a book unobtrusively. So the one on the left, maybe you'll be able to see, is less than 2 inches tall. A lot of the historical examples at the Grolier Club are engravings, especially these by Edwin Davis French. And so they're incised with tiny lines on metal plates, and there's an enormous amount of detail in that 2 inches. The one in the middle, because I'm greedy, is the one that I took as an example for the size I wanted to work with. It's the largest one I saw while I was here. And I wanted to see how large, as an illustrator, I wanted to see just how large I could get away with. So it's about 3.5 inches by 4.5 inches from edge to edge, and then the design inside is a little bit smaller. And then on the right is just an example of how, while I was here at the fellowship, I used a loop to see the details of the book plates because they are so small. So historically, these are commissioned objects, commissioned by an institution, by a private collector. They would commission the designer to create it for them. So you have a dialogue between the designer and the collector. And they can be, I think as Jamie referenced, they can be deeply personal objects. They're encoding taste, education, aspiration in a very compact form, how people want to be seen as, people of letters, literate people with a personal library. So some of them feel kind of like tiny portraits of a reader's inner world, also, just a window into how somebody sees themselves in context of their relationship to books. Some also, rather than being portrait style, emphasize symbolic scenes and objects. So I chose, for this example, a book plate that was commissioned for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a book plate in the middle that I just thought it looked cool. But I was just very taken with it. Commissioned for a woman named Martha August. She's reading, she's outdoors, she has a beauty mark on her cheek. And then on the right, one that came out of the William H. Helfand Bookplate collection, which collects medical ephemera, and so this was from a doctor, and I like the kind of horror movie lighting. So, these days you're more likely to encounter universal book plates, which include a blank space for the owner's name to be written in. They're cheaper and, these days often mass produced. So one of my goals was actually to create a universal book plate that felt special for the owner by producing a limited edition that preserves the bookplate traditions of printmaking and material care that goes into the process. And these are just two examples of juvenile bookplates for children that where you can see that their names were written in at the bottom. So this, let me see here. So this is a view of the enclosure that houses the bookplates I designed after the fellowship. So taking that material care into consideration, I wanted to protect the bookplates. They're a set of 6. So they're basically a nonlinear series that tells a story that can be arranged in any order. And I decided to house them in a handmade enclosure that kind of walks you into the world as you open it. So if you were to receive it, you would see the enclosure closed with the belly band around it. When the belly band is removed, a simplified stamped version of the logo is revealed. So that logo kind of doubles as the logo of the imaginary bookshop that's sort of at the center of this project, and the title of the project itself. So when you open the tab and pull up the first flap, the interior side offers an in-world project description of the project. And I pulled that text on the side. So it says, the bookshop cat walks along the catenary. These bookplates document the wanderings of a cat who sleeps all day and would prefer to sleep all night as well, if only he could find an appropriately sunny spot. His nightly movements take him from book to book, where his interference with the collection has been recorded. When you open the next flap, you'll see a provisional index of the books the cat has interfered with so far, listed alphabetically by author. And so I have the index on the side here too. A book by Jesse Ball, a short story by Borges, a novel by Italo Calvino, a short story by Stephen Millhauser, a story by Vladimir Nabokov, and a very interesting book that I'll talk about later that collects letters sent to Mount Wilson Observatory between 1915 and 1935. So the book plates themselves come stacked in the order of the index. I really wanted to not indicate the chronology of the cat's journey. We can't know that. We're not the cat. We don't know which books he visited first. So I hope by following, that chain of logic, people will feel encouraged to mix them around. But these are the 6 book plates side by side here. You can see all 6. So right now they're in the order of, I believe, on the side, they're in the order of The Library of Babel, The Baron and the Trees, No One Will Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again, Cat and Mouse, Sleep Death's Brother, and Cloud Castle Lake. So I'll just talk a little more about some things that really inspired me and influenced the project before I kind of get into the details of the making of the project. Something that really struck me while I was here about the Grolier bookplate collection was the range. There are these, as you can see on the left, these formal heraldic designs that borrow from coat of arms, very traditional, but also small handmade plates and juvenile book plates, that introduced children to the idea of being a caretaker of books. The book plate on the right was a hectograph made using hectography, which was a duplication process that used special inks and gelatin. So it's kind of like an ancestor of today's process with gel printing plates. And then the one in the middle was created by the artist that I believe it's depicting, on the plate. And then one of my favorite discoveries was book plates that include multiple owners. I didn't even try to look up any context for the book plate on the left inscribed "the property of Alice Klauber and her friends." I prefer to kind of imagine how that worked, that they had a shared library together. And then another is a book plate designed by Edie French that was commissioned for Maria Gerard Messenger and shared with her companion, Elizabeth Chamberlain. And so you can see it has both of their names at the top. At the bottom, it says the Orchards, and then it shows their home, and it's a very uplifting, joyful kind of domestic scene. I was also very influenced by Japanese book plates. I spent time with the March 1986, I think, issue of the Bookplate Journal, as well as book plates in Japan, the portfolio on the right, which was a very recent acquisition by the Grolier Club Library at the time, and contains 50 examples of Japanese book plates, original examples adhered to the portfolio. And I think Jamie was the person who told me that this portfolio existed. So I want to thank you for that. I came in kind of not having no idea, what the collections actually were and what the holdings really are. And one thing that was really fantastic was that everybody were kind of checking in to see where I was headed with this and bringing in things that I could consult. So these are 3 examples from inside book plates in Japan. And according to the article, Bookplate Collecting in Japan, which was in that issue, that March 1986 issue of the Bookplate Journal, book plates arrived in Japan through Western examples around 1900. You can instantly see that they're more colorful and that, they're using different processes to create them. These were, I believe, woodcut and copperplate print book plates. So one thing that's very cool, I think, about this is that I read in the article that early Japanese bookplate societies were formed because of the enthusiasm about the introduction of book plates, and they actively exchanged them, collected them in albums, and artists donated book plates to help support those networks. So there's something really interesting to me about these small private labels being exchanged in a community and having kind of a public life and a social life. So these, because I was here doing this research fellowship, I had the opportunity to see all of this in person. And I was able to, gaze upon these wonderful brushstrokes on this book plate, see the texture, look at them through the loop. So this is an example, I think, that really shows just like the confidence of the process that they were using as well, with the hand painting on top of the woodcut as a way of finishing the book plate. And then coincidentally, inside that issue of the Bookplate Journal was this article, Katazome Bookplates, by W.E. Butler, which broke down a stencil and dye process that uses rice paste as a resist. And it included photos of the whole process and actually had a tipped-in original bookplate created from that process. So I was able to look at that and handle that. And then these are also finished with hand painting after printing. When I was printing my own book plates, which were screen printed, I printed a few additional copies on slightly thicker bright white paper. The original edition is on kind of a parchment toned paper, very, very thin, a little bit translucent, because I wanted to try the hand painting on top of the book plate. So my intention is to try hand coloring on a few of these and maybe produce a very small variable edition of just a couple. So far, I've only done some crazy color tests that you can kind of see in the background, but it's on my list now. So this is just a close-up of the cat in the bookplate set. This is from the bookplate that was referencing The Library of Babel by Borges. I don't consider this the first bookplate in terms of the cat's journey, but it is the first one I drew, and it did help inform the concept of the project. I have basically been an insomniac my entire life, since I was like 5 years old. And when I was a kid, I would stuff a towel under my door and make a tent with my pillows and read with a flashlight, just all night. And so I kind of feel like this project and the cat in particular comes out of that experience, just kind of roaming around in and out of these books all night, every night while everyone else sleeps. But he's not a stand-in for me. I would have been interested in what was going on in these scenes. He's really not. He's really just looking for a spot to take a nap, and he's getting a little frustrated. But as he drifts through, he functions as a connector. His movement in and out of each bookplate links the scenes to one another. And so because each scene is a distinct narrative fragment with no prescribed order, he gives us that encouragement to speculate about what we're seeing, what came before, and what might come next. So this is just another shot of the 6 bookplates lined up. More and more, I'm really drawn to work that engages someone's imagination rather than focusing on offering a full, literal, description of a scene. And so one thing that was really fun for me with this is that the scenes are all unresolved, and they will forever be unresolved. These are meant to be pasted into books and dispersed into shelves. And once you do that, any attempt to curate a sequence just disappears. You can't control it. From then on, the way someone encounters the cat's journey depends on where the bookplates have ended up. So the narrative needed to be nonlinear by design. So my hope is that, each plate can stand alone and that the arrangement is open. That was the intention. And so each is, like I mentioned, is inspired by a scene from a book these are all actually from my personal library. I initially considered using scenes from recognizable classic novels, but I could not get myself excited about the idea of drawing Moby Dick. I don't know if I would have finished. So I just decided to use texts that I have read over and over and over, shared with other people, loaned out, that I buy multiple copies of so I can loan them out to people. And one thing also that attracted me to these is that they're not already associated with specific illustrations. So these are just responses. These kind of carry responses to moments that stayed with me in those books. But of course, the cat is interfering with them, so they're not perfect moments. But they're definitely not official illustrations for these books. So this plate is referencing a moment in The Baron in the Trees by Italo Calvino. In the novel, there's a young nobleman named Cosimo, and he decides to live permanently in the trees. So in one scene, he is leading a group of what the book calls local urchins to safety after they're caught stealing fruit from the farmers' orchards. And so the scene that I kind of plucked out that I wanted to work with, there's a little line from it. The men with pitchforks who thought they had caught the fruit thieves at last saw them hopping away through the air like birds. So you can see the cat also leaping away from the pitchforks in the bottom right, which is too bad because an orchard in Italy sounds like a great place to take a nap. So that would have been a good one. This plate responds to Borges' The Library of Babel. So if you haven't read that story, it imagines an infinite library as a stand-in for the universe. I worked from the description of the architecture. One line reads, "In the hallway there is a mirror which faithfully duplicates all appearances. Men usually infer from this mirror that the library is not infinite. I prefer to dream that its polished surfaces represent and promise the infinite. Light is provided by some spherical fruit which bears the name of lamps. There are 2, transversely placed in each hexagon. The light they emit is insufficient, incessant." So I'm not sure why the cat is leaving the library. It's not sunny. That's probably why. But also to me, he seems a little creeped out by the infinite regress or the glowing orbs. And then this plate, again, is referencing No One May Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again, Letters to Mount Wilson Observatory, 1915 to 1935, which was published by the Museum of Jurassic Technology in Los Angeles. If you haven't been to that museum, I really, really recommend it. So it collects real letters sent to the observatory by people offering, again, their personal cosmological theories. They're often poetic, almost impossible to visualize definitively. And so here's a short excerpt that kind of stayed with me from the beginning. Maybe even the first letter. I think the letter writer's name is Alice. Venus is thickly blanketed with clouds. That is a place that stores the clouds. Jupiter be, I suppose, a store place for rain, snow, and hail. Others to keep air, wind, sunfire, wildfire, starfire, moisture, electricity, gases. It is worked by a human spirit world of human spirits that run over the top of the world in wind. And so the idea here, I'm gathering, is that the cat isn't super excited about all the letters, all of these intense letters floating down and starting to kind of head his way. This plate references Cloud Castle Lake by Vladimir Nabokov, which I used to think was a really funny story, and I reread it recently, and it's very sad. So in it, there's a man on a truly miserable group trip, and in the middle of his misery, he encounters an impossibly perfect view through a window. So here's a description. Upstairs was a room for travelers. I shall take it for the rest of my life, he's reported to have said as soon as he had entered it. The room itself had nothing remarkable about it. On the contrary, it was a most ordinary room. But from the window, one could clearly see the lake with its cloud and its castle in a motionless and perfect correlation of happiness. So basically, I don't want to tell you the end, but let's just say you're going to be so frustrated. So you can't see the perfect view properly here because unfortunately the cat is blocking our view. Nabokov was a lepidopterist, and it looks like some butterflies have appeared to carry the cat away. So if you can read the story and you'll get more details about the scene. So this bookplate is inspired by the short story Cat and Mouse by Stephen Millhauser from the book Dangerous Laughter, which imagines a cat confronting the existential consequences of actually catching the mouse. As a lifetime Looney Tunes fan, I instantly understood this dilemma. So the story is definitely indebted to Looney Tunes. Lots of props, lots of cartoon physics. It's basically a sleepy bookshop cat's nightmare. And a line from it is, "Now there is nothing left but the red handkerchief. The halves become red theater curtains which begin to close. Across the closing curtains, words write themselves in black script. The end." We haven't gotten that far, so I hope he makes it. This plate is referencing the book Sleep Death's Brother by Jesse Ball, which is a manual on lucid dreaming. One piece of advice in the book, I think on page 55, says, "Next time you wake up in a dream and realize your true situation, please try it. Just jump into the air and fly away. You will see that it works very well." So the cat has woken up in this scene and is just instantly kind of hightailing it out of there. And I think, unless you like giant eyeballs with tendrils, I think we all know why. So the visual designs of the book plates were informed by elements in specific examples of book plates in the Grolier Club's collection. I didn't treat them as models to imitate, but more as constraints and compositional prompts. So for the cat's interference with Baron in the trees, I was actually drawn to that particular scene partially because of this book plate when I saw it. I really loved how it used, density and a full bleed design to create kind of a sense of enclosure. So that's something I wanted to borrow for my book plate. And it's also the only one that is full bleed. For the Library of Babel inspired book plate, the design inspiration isn't as directly visible, and that's because of how the process went. My original intention was to design each book plate in a totally different style, and that kind of referenced the book plate I was taking design inspiration from. And so I started this one with a much more geometric approach, but halfway through I decided I really wanted the full set to feel harmonized and have a handmade feel, so I pivoted. But this one did really help me approach repetition in pure black and white at a small scale. And I did take, the symmetry and the depth and some of the elements of the shelving. For the book plate inspired by No One Will Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again, I took design inspiration from this book plate designed by Edie French. It's hard to avoid having a lecture that is just filled with only Edie French book plates once you start to look at them. This one kind of shocked me because it feels very psychedelic to me, and it's from 1906. It was engraved, meaning it was printed from a metal plate and sized with extremely, extremely fine lines. And so I didn't try to mimic that, not with screen printing and not as someone just learning screen printing, especially. But I did take direct inspiration from the curved outer edge, the dynamic way that was handled, and then the swirl of books around the octopus were the inspiration for how the letters are kind of chaotically floating around. For the cat's interference with Cloud Castle Lake, I found a pretty direct, great counterpart in this book plate. So I took the symmetry and the idea of leaving the window open. My shutters are implied. They're on the outside, in case you were wondering. And then this juvenile book plate, which is, again, I showed it earlier, it's a universal book plate. This was a reference point for the cat's experience inside Cat and Mouse. It just kind of felt very appropriate to use this design with panels to show quick sequences of cartoon chaos. And then for the Journey Through Sleep, Death's Brother, I was very much drawn to the negative space in this book plate and the way the light and the shadows were handled. It felt very calming. It felt like a world I really wanted to spend time in, which made it a fun foil for building a scene you'd want to leave. So the title of the project, again, is Catenary Books, and I stole that from my father-in-law. I took it from, I was inspired by one of his artworks. So my father-in-law's name is Mark O'Donnell, and all of his, well, not all, he has more inside, but a lot of his artwork is publicly viewable in an alley in Brewery Town, Philadelphia. It's called Flora Alley. He calls it Flora Alley Gallery, and he uses it as his own outdoor gallery. He's convinced some of his neighbors to let him expand it on their fences and walls as well. And he works primarily with all-weather materials like car paint on aluminum panels, and he seals the surfaces with clear coat so they don't degrade outside, and they're huge as well. Many of his pieces incorporate concepts from physics and calculus. If you can read this title, it says, Princess TP orchestrates the objective reduction of the wave function. That is a classic Mark O'Donnell title. He has another piece that illustrates a woman walking along the catenary, and that's actually a line from that title as well. I just don't happen to have a photo of it right now. So that was the inspiration for the title. A catenary is a natural arc that forms when a line is tethered to two opposing points, like the arc of a telephone wire. So in this project, the catenary becomes a way to describe the connective space in between books, linking them to a larger imagined connection. That's why the first bit of text inside the first flap when you open it leads with the bookshop cat walks along the catenary. So for me, part of the conceit of the project is that once you sign your name and place a book plate into one of your own books, your personal library becomes an extension of Catenary Books. And Pop, which is what I call my father-in-law, has helpfully given us a visual example of a catenary in this red velvet rope protecting his rooftop jazz club. So my process for this project extended far outside of my normal comfort zone in a great way. I tried a lot of new things, but I started with a very familiar process, which was just kind of loose, chaotic thumbnail sketches in pencil that no one can understand but me. I probably have like 12 pages that all look like this with the notes scattered. The process for this project extended far outside of my normal comfort zone by drawing digitally in Photoshop. And that just allows me to move and adjust elements very, very quickly. So I probably went through, 10 to 15 variations for each design. And these are just a few of the sketches for the book plate on the right, just so you can kind of see, different variations that it went through on its way to what it became. And then this one, I think gets in the zone of what you might call control freak. This is when I started, I get the tunnel vision and I start just kind of focusing on moving pixels around and focusing on tiny details that truly no one cares about. Just to make, I don't know, to make the project take longer, I'm not sure. But these are all later stages of this design. They're very minute. The one on the bottom right, I think, is the final digital sketch. And so you can see the end result was pretty close. I deliberately made these like super tight so that when I hand drew over them, because they're so small, there was really no room for error. So before I went to the next step of tracing those on a light box and hand drawing them, I needed to learn how to silkscreen. So I took 2 workshops at Gutenberg Arts in Gutenberg, New Jersey. And I took Intro to Silkscreen, and I took Painterly Silkscreen, which ended up having nothing to do with my project, but it was so much fun. And so because the book plates are 3.5 by 4.5 inches from edge to edge, and screen printing floods the paper with ink, unlike some other printmaking processes, I found out that I really needed to be judicious with detail. And I also had a lot to learn about paper very quickly. What holds ink well, what buckles, what survives handling, since it will be in use. And also, what won't create a visible dent when pasted into a book. Paper that's flexible enough but strong enough for the process and the usage. So this is a view of my light box from above on my desk. So after I settled on a digital sketch, I printed it out and drew the final scenes on the light box using a conical nib pen dipped in Sumi ink, which is not probably the appropriate ink for that pen. But on the right, if you can see, it's hard to see the depth, but it's kind of shaped like a bullet with a little pointy end. So it has several channels, so a lot of ink can flow down. And the nib is pretty broad also, which helped me keep a broad line and not get too thin for mine onto the screen. Pull the squeegee wand, kept sticking to myself to